Welcome to Moonshot Radio, where we stop and take a moment to reflect on the rapid pace of technological change. We meet the people reprogramming our future to explore what's coming, how it's reshaping our world, and what that means for our human experience. I'm Linda Du, a fintech founder, investor, and adventurer, posing the question of what it means to be human and exist in society in the age of technology. Our guest today is Joho, an interactive media artist exploring the intertwined life of the digital and physical body. She creates immersive installations that blur the line between creator and machine, crafting eerie collaborations. By feeding her personal notes, images, and even memories into artificial intelligence, she raises questions about what is learned and what is lost when humans and machines try to understand each other. In this conversation, we'll talk about the practice of embodying our digital self through art. So, Jo, I was really interested to speak with you about your digital corporeality project. So could you tell me a bit more about the project and what is meant by digital corporeality?
It's like a mouthful, isn't it? Digital corporeality. Because I work with a lot of digital technology and we work with a lot of digital devices in our daily lives, right? And then the content that we interact with, it's seemingly intangible or immaterial. And it seems like we get really immersed in these digital spaces without thinking about the materiality behind the devices. My work mostly touches on this forgotten materiality. So every time I have a work, there's some element of it that like sees through the work in like a language that we understand, like through the body, through the flesh, through skeletons, right? Like X-rays, for example, which is very corporeal. Or it can also manifest in installations like excessive wires, coming from your digital devices like charger ports or power cables, or even looking at the circuit board behind a screen or something like that. So I think my work, I try to bring that sense of materiality and materiality into the digital experience and what we are used to.
A lot of people are having avatars or presences in the online world. And I know that's something that you explore. I think I've also read that you used to be a gamer. I don't know if that's still the case. So I'd be interested how you think about people's digital representations of themselves. Is it that they try and be the best versions of themselves or something different? What is it about their personality that they're trying to represent in digital worlds?
That's a really great question. I think that as a gamer, I spend 25% of my week in a game or some other game, just gaming in general. During the pandemic, there was actually a lot of people joining VRChat or really immersive worlds. Even with raves, they threw virtual raves and stuff online, which was pretty cool because we couldn't really socialize in person. In Singapore, I'm a part of the queer community, and a lot of our talks around avatars or having a digital face or digital body is pretty freeing for those who want to express themselves in a way that they can't in like a country like Singapore, let's say. Singapore is conservative, but it's not like super, super conservative. So you can be trans without being harassed like too much. But the advantage of having a digital avatar is that if you wanted to explore another way of being, you don't have to just limit yourself to a representation of what your physical body looks like. So I think that's a really fun way to embody another form. And it doesn't even have to be a humanoid form.
How do you see the difference between someone having an online avatar in the digital world versus incorporating digital elements like these cybernetic things into their actual physical presence?
I think there's a challenge because our technology hasn't really caught up yet in the physical world. Let's say you wanted to have the experience of having 8 arms, right? Yeah, sure, we have haptic feedback in our controllers or with the VR vests that vibrate. But I don't know if there's a way right now to be able to like go into your brain and then trigger the neurons that make you feel like you have, I don't know, like 6 additional arms. So I think the challenge is that the technology hasn't really caught up yet to, let's say, like VRChat and like different digital avatars right now.
Very fair. And now I'm going to ask you about AI because I know it's the hot topic on everyone's mind, but I'm also aware that you started working with AI coding technology a long time ago. So could you talk a bit about your journey? As far as I'm aware, I remember that even in Berlin, you were doing a digital media course that was quite innovative at the time. But is that where your journey started, or did it start before then?
I actually started in architecture. So I have a bachelor's in architecture from a school in New York. And then I moved to Philadelphia. That's where I practiced architecture. And I felt like the practice wasn't really for me. The education was great. But then when I went into practice architecture, it was just like a lot of drawing toilets and stairs. And I didn't really want that. So I moved to Berlin and then I pursued this kind of not really adjacent to architecture. There's a lot of like computer programs that you can learn, game engines and generative art programs that I was really interested in. Because in architecture, you also have these softwares that you have to learn really quickly. I think like learning these programs was like taught, right, in architecture school. So when I went into this new media art program, I learned all of these tools that can make like real-time visuals or real-time audio. In school, I didn't really play around with AI. That was only when COVID happened. And then my parents were like, okay, come back to Singapore. We don't know what's going to happen to the world. It seems like everything's shutting down. You're in Berlin. You just graduated. Come back to Singapore. And then we'll see what happens. So I did. And for, I guess, 8 to 9 months, we were in like a really tight lockdown. So there wasn't much to do. I played a lot of games. And then at some point, there's this rise in AI generated visuals and images. So I was like, okay, let me try it out because it seems quite interesting. I went on this website called Artbreeder, and that was when I started to produce these AI generated images for the first time. And they were mostly like architecture focused. But it was pretty interesting because you're like the language of the website and how they combined images was through breeding. So there were like different genes that you were breeding from like characteristics of different images. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And it was more of more of a speculative exercise for me, imagining the future of buildings and the built environment in different forms and in an alien environments.
Very cool. And then could I ask you also about the use of AI in your work? So both in the production part as well as in the output part. And when I'm talking about the production part, I've heard a lot of artists saying that they have challenges with the copyright and the ownership aspects, especially of generative AI. And so I'd be interested to get your view on that. And then on the production side as well, it would be great to hear about your project, A Developing Slate, and the role of AI in as a participant there.
Yeah. For me, like the ethical implications that come with using these AI platforms, like Gen AI platforms, for me, it was a real struggle in the beginning because I know that as an artist or an illustrator or even a writer, your work gets scraped off of the internet and then gets trained through these algorithms that then other people use. So I really empathize with that. And so when I use AI, I'm constantly thinking about creative agency and the legacy of these outputs, right? Like it was trained on something and it's trained on these huge data sets that meld together like millions and millions of images, of words. I'm always on a seesaw when it comes to AI. Sometimes I'm like, oh, it's so bad. Or sometimes I'm on the other side. I'm like, but it's so efficient. And then I'm seesawing between the two. But thankfully, as an artist that doesn't really make money from illustrative work or writing articles or writing poems or all that, I don't have that worry of AI ripping off my ideas because my works are not just an image or just text. Thankfully, it doesn't know how to copy ideas of installations yet. In terms of production, I have this work that I exhibited in Ames Yavu's gallery in Singapore last year in July called A Developing Slate. And I was riffing off of the term a blank slate, where it refers to how when you're generating something from AI, it's not coming from a blank slate, right? It's coming from like this huge database that it's been trained on. And in that sense, I formed this installation, how people who are trying to create images of old palimpsests or old books where they're x-raying through the pages or x-raying through the material to see what was written before on the wax tablet before it got scraped off and then something else gets written on it again. So there's like this history that's being erased and replaced. So for me, my installation, it mirrored the imaging technology and the installation that they use to take images of really old books. And then I refer a lot to like the palimpsest. And then in the installation, there's also a wax tablet where I created a image of a page through AI based on my own writing. So I trained it on my own writing, and then I printed that generated image out and I impressed it onto a wax tablet. Like it's a wax and resin mix. It has this like really nice texture, and in certain compositions, depending on the mixture of the liquid, sometimes it can feel like leather, which is pretty nice. So adding this like corporeality to something that was created very digitally was pretty interesting to me. And then the outcome looked like this hybridized book where there's like the wax tablet. There was also like the digital tablet behind the wax tablet, which was playing its own visual, but it wasn't meant to be seen. It's supposed to kind of like shine through the wax tablet because it's a bit translucent. Yeah, I feel like the ideas are pretty complex. Actually, when I first made it, I was like, what did I just make? I don't understand it, you know?
So in a developing slate, what was the feedback of people that you got? So what for you was the output? Was it the process of people interacting with it? Was it you developing the materials, the physical embodiment?
That's when I first made it, I was kind of ashamed of it because I was like, oh, it's like this really, really small object because I'm used to creating big installations and I'm used to creating visuals that are shown on a building. So this was a really small installation work and like with a really big idea behind it. And at the point when it was exhibited, I didn't really know how to explain it. But I think it was received well. A lot of people were really intrigued by the materiality of the wax tablets because it was also a really digital exhibition where there's screens, like pixels, like just, or prints, right? There isn't anything that was like a visceral element where, because during an artist talk, I brought some of my prototypes with me and I handed it to the audience and they were all touching it and I was so fascinated by the fact that you could touch something and there's like texture. because most of the things in the room was like digital and smooth. So bringing that element to it, I think was everyone was pretty intrigued by this idea. So yeah.
Did you think about the actual output of the work, like the response that your visitors had with the installation? Or was it more the physical embodiment itself, or the overall idea that it was representing?
I think for me, it was more of the idea that it represented and how it might trigger different thoughts in different people. Most of my work is taking a part of the installation and prompting people to rethink their relationship with their technology, like with their digital devices. I really like when digital devices are taken apart or shown in a different light, made useless, like it's just a shell of metal and plastic, to have people rethink their relationship with these physical devices.
So I've seen this pop up in a couple of different ways, but some that touched on points that you've mentioned might be if a person and their avatar. So I think the example that I heard of this was like, was it Warcraft, where people had avatars and they were playing these live action role play games, and then their avatars would have relationships and eventually they would have relationships. Versus as well now, you're seeing people have relationships with completely digital LLMs with no humans behind them. So I'd be interested to get your thoughts on those.
Having relationships online.
Both having relationships online, but if it's because sometimes I think it's framed as like just the avatars of people are having relationships. So then are the actual people themselves in relationships? And then also people having relationships with robots. Because I think that's a little bit different from a relationship with a device, where often you'll use that as a portal to get news about your friends or what your family in another country is doing, versus actually having a relationship with an LLM or a digital representation of another human being.
Yeah, I mean, people are having like their chat GPTs be their like boyfriend or girlfriend or companion now, which is pretty funny and interesting because I'm like, how immersive can it be, you know? But in terms of having relationships through avatars, have you ever been on VRChat?
I have not.
So, do you know what VRChat is?
No, no.
VRChat became really popular during the pandemic because everyone's stuck at home. People and teenagers who have a Quest or a VR headset would usually hang out in VRChat because it's free and there's different worlds with many servers. It's a really big platform. It's interesting going in there because teenagers hang out and sleep in the virtual world with their headsets on. I would often stumble into rooms and see like ten avatars just like sleeping on the bed next to each other. Or I would go into a room and there'd be like 6 to 10 of them just like sitting together but looking at themselves in the mirror. Like there are mirrors placed all over the virtual world because it enhances immersiveness. So when you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you have an avatar and you're moving your controllers, your arms in the mirror move as well. So there's that level of immersiveness that your brain recognizes that that's your body that you're looking at.
Yeah, I could never do that. I find it tough to sleep with stuff on my head. But then I'm also wondering, because then why not just do that in the real world? Like, what are the barriers to just getting 10 of your mates together and having a big sleepover, right? So kind of where is the divide? Where do you draw the line? And also, because I think you mentioned as well, like if you're having a relationship with a robot, like is it really there? Is there a need for physicality in human relationships? Is that something you see as like, there needs to be a sense of like tactile and haptic feedback from a person?
Yeah, I think just like I said before, I don't think our technology is there yet, But people are trying to develop devices where you can connect to another person physically, whether it's like sex toys, let's say. You can control it with an app, and your loved one is like long distance lovers really far away, and then you can control the device that they have. Or if you have like a haptic vest or something that you can remotely control. So I think that's pretty interesting, and people are definitely developing that. But I don't know to what extent it would be super effective. It's not the same as a hug or a cuddle. You know what I mean?
Also, I feel like then you get into the territory of uncanny valley as well, which is like, okay, maybe you try and make it more and more realistic. But then when you get to the point where it's feels super realistic, like you're getting with a lot of the Gen AI stock images that I'm starting to see pop up on websites all over the
hmm
place, where it's like there's something just off that makes it feel like slightly unsettling. Do you think we'd end up at that stage?
Then we'll probably get over that hump somehow. It's uncanny until it's not. And then it's just like quite close to reality. I feel like we would get to that stage. For some reason, we like to make things as real as possible using digital devices. Like you see all these really realistic computer games or like really realistic animation that's coming out. Like in, what is that show called? Love, Death, and Robots. Have you seen it on Netflix? It's like a TV show where there are many episodes and they're like made by different directors, different animation studios, but they're always like surrounding this like a speculative question of what would happen if everyone on Earth disappeared because there was like a robot revolution. And then now there's like robots touring the ancient sites where like people used to live, stuff like that. So there are like animations there that are really realistic. And I'm like, I can't believe this is not live action and it's all rendered, which is pretty crazy that we can do that now.
But then as well, because you also mentioned that you're part of Singapore's queer community and that a lot of your artistic practice developed through COVID. After COVID, everyone had really missed gathering and parties, etc., and being physically together. So could you speak a bit about that? Do we have a fundamental need to be interacting with physical humans and know that they are human?
That's an interesting question. I think so. I think when you interact with algorithms or robots too much, you get bored because it's like the same thing over and over again. There's a barrier. And somehow interacting with other humans, at least for me, is more interesting because I think humans are just more complex. There's body language, there's action, there's gestures, there's like mistakes. I think some mistakes that people make can be really entertaining or can be really revealing. So it's more interesting for me, at least, to interact with real life people. There's just more to it. I think in the past, I used to be able to be online a lot, like to socialize a lot online, but there's so much miscommunication that happens because the way that you text is not the way that you speak or the way that you gesture is different from like emojis online. So I think there's just so many nuances and so much more complexity in the real world when you interact with people socially. Digital platforms and technology, like people will always try to mimic or recreate conditions that happen in the physical world online. So maybe we'll get close to that, but I feel like I still want that human connection.
I went through a phase because my last corporate job was very hardcore and I wasn't getting access to the best tools. I wasn't allowed to use ChatGPT for things beyond the brainstorming stage. And I did this program that kind of changed my life where I was learning to use Gen AI tools. The concept was how to get a product using nothing else but different types of AI tools. And for about 3 weeks, I had no human interactions. I got really good at using AI. So I learned how to use ChatGPT for stuff, Perplexity for market research, Midjourney for images. But then at the end, I just needed to talk to a real human. So I actually had to re-socialize myself. This was in Berlin, where I have a very good group of friends, but I also thought I've gotten a bit weird by not talking to anyone, so let me just try and speak to other people. And so I did these like time left dinners where they basically match you up with some people in your city so that you can talk to random people. And I was like, I'm going to do that to re-socialize myself for humans. So yeah, I definitely.
That's pretty funny. There's also a specific way that you have to talk to ChatGPT to get it to do what you want, right? Like it's in steps. Or if you ask too much of it, it might only do like half of it. Or so you have to talk to it in steps and request for information in steps. Which is pretty interesting because now it's like, because I also teach at 2 universities here. And increasingly, I've been noticing that the texts that I'm reading from the students are all written by ChatGPT. And you can tell because there's M dashes or there's a lot of embellishment in the text, like too much. So I've noticed that some people who I know have started writing in this style. And I'm like, it sounds like it's written by ChatGPT. And they're like, no, I wrote it. Like, I didn't use AI at all. And then I'm like, oh, but you can tell that people are being trained on this type of language or like certain words that ChatGPT uses more. Let's say, like delving into this project. Like, delving is a really common word. Yeah. So using these tools can also train people to write like that.
Yeah, but then that's also interesting because are we becoming more robotic? And something else I also read about is that because of the massive environmental impacts of ChatGPT and these agents, it's a massive cost on the environment when we say please and thank you. But I still do it because I don't want to be rude in real life and because you're conversing with the AIs in like this very natural way. So I wonder if it's actually making us nicer, even if it does have environmental impacts. And the other example I would use is that some of the things that I see on Reddit and Twitter, where it's just so nasty and people are so mean to each other on the internet. So I'm wondering if maybe it's a good thing that ChatGPT is forcing us to be nicer, or is it just making us more boring?
Oh, I don't say please or thank you to ChatGPT. I think you're just nice. But I also know people who say please and thank you out of fear. Because I don't know if you've heard of this theory. I forgot what they call it, but there's like this speculative AI monster that enslaves humans in the future. And it enslaves all the humans that was mean to it when it was just a small AI. If I was abusing ChatGPT, maybe in 200 years, it'll come back to enslave me because I was mean to it. Some people are afraid of that. So they're like, okay, we better be nice to it now.
But then it's not about being a slave to technology, given that you explore this a lot in your art. Because something that I hear often is that, oh, I don't want to be a slave to technology. But from my perspective, if you use Google Maps and you follow the directions blindly, which I always do when I'm driving, and I use Google Calendar to organize my life. And then when Google Calendar tells me, I'll use it as an enforcement mechanism to control myself. But do you think we're already slaves to technology, or what would it take for us to actually be slaves to technology?
I wouldn't say that we're slaves to technology. For me, technology is a really great tool for us to like live life more efficiently. There's the Cyborg Manifesto. Have you read it? It's by Donna Haraway. Basically, the theory is that she doesn't see anything as like body or tech or like in binaries, right? Because we're already living in a hybrid way. like from digital to body. If I need to locate myself in the city, I'll use my phone to see where I am. I'll use my phone to check the time. It's already part of us and it's already part of our daily lives. I wouldn't say we're a slave to it. We're kind of like cyborgs. Like the phone is an extension of us and anyone can reach us through this device. I wouldn't put a hierarchy on this because it is just a tool. I think we either demonize it or put it on a pedestal too much. It's something that we've created for ourselves. The biases that it has or like the way that people use it, it's up to us to determine. Or big tech, I don't know. It's people. We can control it.
And then I'd love to ask you about geographies as well. So, if I think about Singapore, you mentioned that it's quite conservative, but when you go, it's also very technologically advanced. It feels like you've stepped into the future. So, I'd be interested to hear what each of these places has given you a perspective of when it comes to both social progression, but also embrace of digital technologies and your own artistic practice and how that's been received.
Yeah, and I think you can relate to some of this as well. In Berlin, like the city that I was living in before Singapore, it was very much like anti-surveillance, like very private, like your individual privacy is really important. There's no cameras on the streets. If you take a photo on the street and someone walks by, it's like invading their privacy, right? So in Singapore, there are like cameras everywhere. It's like a really safe city because if you steal, I don't know, an apple from a tree, they're gonna find you and arrest you. No, it's not that extreme. It is extreme in the sense that if you do steal something from a restaurant, let's say, they can find you. If you stole like a sculptor, they could find you potentially and track where you've been. So Singapore is intensely digital in that sense as well. In New York, I think I learned a lot about local cultures. The underground was really important for me there because I spent a lot of time in the local club scene. So my attachment to local music scenes begun actually in New York. Yeah, and I also brought it over to Berlin, where all my friends were also part of the music scene, like the creative scene in general. And that was really eye-opening because Berlin has more connections to new media art, which is the art that I practice today. And that's where I also learned this new language of creating installations using generative art or even AI. So Berlin and New York were integral in my, I guess, the way that I've grown to appreciate or shape the way that I've seen the world or the way that I see art and what art can do. And then in Singapore, it's, I think, like still growing, this scene. It's small, but it's growing, and there's like a developing taste for digital art like this in the public.
And then, in terms of how your art is received and how you shape your art, has that changed depending on the geographies you've been in? Is it more like you're trying to convey a slightly different message?
I think with anything that I make, it's a reflection of where I'm at. So the most recent work that I did was with my collaborator Copy. We have a duo called Joe and Copy, and we had this solo exhibition at a university here, and it centered around the way that we interpret words today on the internet. So we wrote a really long manifesto, right? With full of emotion, charged with it had a lot of, I wouldn't say aggressive statements, but like really firm statements. And you could tell the emotion from it. And every time a person walked into the exhibition, the manifesto that we wrote would get distilled into different sentences, and the person that comes in actually triggers this reaction where a sentence from the manifesto would get taken and then put through a large language model and then reinterpreted through the LLM and then gets put back into the manifesto. So over time, the manifesto actually becomes like meaningless. Like the emotion is gone, it's washed, rinsed, sanitized, right? Like the message that was once there is just gone. So I think that also reflects how we, like me and Copy, as educators in universities, we're like, okay, we're reading all of this text from students that are generated by ChatGPT, and we have to make meaning out of it, right? Because this was submitted as like the final assessment. So we're reading something that the students might not even have read themselves, which we thought was pretty, I don't know, it was like it's messed up. So our installation wanted to reflect this feeling of unease when we're like interpreting words that might not even have meaning.
That is an interesting one. But then, because the manifesto came from a place of intense emotion, do you think that's so basically what makes us human in our outward expression of ourselves? Is it emotion? And why do machines tend towards removing that? Because I was trained in a very classic corporate workspace where a lot of these factors of humanity are stripped away. So everything from communication, corporate communications, being as unemotive as possible, to us actually just like working very long hours and not sleeping enough and ignoring those very basic human biological needs. I'd be interested to hear, when you are expressing yourselves, what is human. And then what else I find interesting now is that a lot of those roles that have become very robotic, those are the ones that are easiest to replace. So if I'm doing a data analysis task, a lot of that stuff where I just need quick iterations, etc., is stuff that a machine can do quite easily. So I'd be interested from the output perspective, what makes us human? What makes human production human?
That's a question that I always ask myself. When AI came into art, I was like, oh, like actually that's the opposite of what I think AI could not replace. Like I'm like at the top of the pyramid, when like where the bottom of the pyramid is like where there are like jobs that AI could replace. Like in my head, it was always art that was at the top, like human expression should not be able to be replaced because it comes from emotion, it comes from like irrationality, it comes from, I don't know. And so when generative AI started to come into visual art a lot more, it started to saturate the whole internet with like artwork, right? I was like, oh, this is like the complete opposite of what I thought it would replace. But then I think about the way that artists approach their work, right? For me, I think there's a spectrum. There's art, and then there's craft, and then there's things that live in between both. And for me, the generative AI images that people just produce from these platforms and call it their art, I feel like without any deeper intention, I feel like that's just craft. If you have a template of a basket and then it's traditional and then you make 1,000 of those, it's like craft. So for me, I think that the intention that goes behind an action is the most important thing, right? When it comes to artwork. But now I've went off a different path. To answer your question, or to not answer your question, I actually don't know. For me now, I'm like, okay, the mistakes that we make or the irrationality, there's something human about it. intuition is also pretty interesting because it's coming from somewhere, but you just have to feel it. It's something that's quite intangible. But I don't know how to answer that question. I think that's why I'm flailing around so much.
Fair enough. I think many people are also struggling to come up with answers. As an artist, what are the themes that you're exploring at the moment? What are some of the other big questions that you're thinking about? And if you are able to share a sneak preview, some of the things that you are working on.
I think platforms like the blockchain or NFT platforms, I feel like it would be really interesting to see how that can be more democratized, where NFT platforms are not just a space for selling and owning work and not just a place to exchange value. I feel like there could be really interesting ways for people to use the blockchain. But I don't know what it is yet. I think that's still something that I have to do more research on. Me and Copy were pretty interested in using platforms in specific ways. One of our artwork is Enzyme. Enzyme 1 is all about showing works on digital screens and visitors coming to own. This is on a closed system. So they come in, they scan a QR code, they have the option to own them. And once they own them, it triggers like a block on the screen that obscures a part of the work. And then over time, this block can infect other blocks. So the more that people try to own the artwork, the more it disappears. By the end of the exhibition, all of the visuals are gone from the screen because it's just obscured based on its perceived value by the public. So I think we also really like to touch on the value, like digital value of things or value that we ascribe to digital objects. And then how these platforms can work in different ways to expose this relationship.
And I was surprised actually when you initially said NFTs because I think everyone saw the woo and then the
Yeah.
back down, less happy times of NFTs. But you're right that it was really NFTs. They were demonstrating ownership. But then one of the other key features of the blockchain is stuff like immutability and the fact that every transaction you have is recorded there. So I really like the idea of showing the idea of some things like consumption through the blockchain storytelling is super fascinating.
Yeah, totally. It is about consumption. It is about like value of assets. So yeah, we really like to think of our works as thought experiments, like objects or installations that explore a different way of being or a different, like exploring the relationship that people normally would have with certain platforms or devices and then turning it on its head.
Amazing. This was super insightful. So that came to the end of all the topical questions that I had. And I was wondering if we could end on a note of two simple questions. So one would be what makes you hopeful about the future? And the other one would be what do you worry about when it comes to the future?
I think for me, what makes me hopeful, like everyone's talking about techno-feudalism and how like big techs have the land and then we're just like working off their land. I am hopeful for a future where I don't have to pay like 10,000 subscriptions, like monthly subscriptions, and that I could actually like own something or I don't know, like just not have money hemorrhaging out of my account on these subscriptions. Like everything now is like behind a paywall or a subscription. So I'm like, I wonder if there's a better way where everything, I don't know, like it's more democratized or going back to the good old days in like the early 2000s where the internet was like mostly free. So yeah, I'm hopeful for another type of structure. And then that's in the very near future, right? but that's all I can think about right now. And then what I'm worried about for the future, I don't know. I'm like really worried about like I'm worried about a lot of things. I think because I'm on TikTok a lot, I'm worried about like the like superficial beauty standards that's like arising. I'm also worried about like the rise of anti-intellectualism, right? That's coming up. And I don't know, there's like a lot of pockets of space on the internet that, you know, have their own echo chambers, and it's scary to go into spaces like that. Even though I'm like an extreme introvert, I can spend months on end without talking to people and it'll be fine. But I know that it's way better to interact with others, getting different viewpoints. Like, even if you don't really agree with someone who didn't vote for the same party as you, digital technology is really good at doing that.
When you mentioned the internet of the early 2000s, I had in my head the sound of the broadband connection.
Yeah,
Which-
I don't even know. It's so iconic.
Thank you so much for this interview. Thank you so much for your time. Join us next week as we talk with Philip Fusinager, founder of Cybrothel, about the future of sexual experiences in the age of machines.